In the left-hand column, zoom in a little bit, I'm going to point out the big signature, Jacob Showalter. Now, don't ask me how to make an SCH out of that, but just trust me that it does. And I think you can probably see from there, it goes W, I don't know what that might be, A-L-D-E-R, but that says Jacob Showalter. To go back, under Jacob, his son Jacob, Johannes or John, Joseph, Christian, and Peter. Above them, a little bit harder to make out, but trust me because it is, Jacob Bossler and his sons, Peter, I think, Jacob, and I forget, but those are the Bosslers. So they not only traveled together, they walked through the courthouse together. Okay, Jacob. Okay. Don't know why that slide looks like that, but we got our dial of generations around to Jacob and Daniel. We're going to let them on the dock, or I should say in the courthouse in Philadelphia, because if we kept going, we would be here till probably midnight. We don't want to do that. We can save up the rest for part 2. There is no planned part 2, but I almost think that there ought to be at some point. If there is a part 2, we will follow the story in America following the 1750 immigration. Jacob the immigrant, Daniel, his 12-year-old son on the ship, down through Joseph, Daniel, Michael, Moab, now we're into familiar territory, put your grandfather there, and so forth. But that would be part 2. What I'm going to give you is just a sneak preview of part 2. This is the Lehigh River, and Jacob settled following his November arrival. The next spring he bought land along the Lehigh River, right about right here. On that spot there's a cement factory today. Too bad. Jacob was buried in this cemetery called the Old Mennonite Cemetery, or the Siegfried Cemetery. John Siegfried was from the Mennonite congregation, growing up at least. But he became involved in the Revolutionary War. He didn't remain in the Mennonite Church. The Mennonite Church, eventually people moved out and the building was abandoned. But the cemetery remains due to John Siegfried, who fought in the Revolutionary War. A Showalter family had to stay inside there in the 1960s or so. And if you're interested in reading about the Mennonite settlement on the Lehigh River, there's a section of it in this book, The Life and Times of Colonel John Siegfried, and I have copies of this available. Daniel moved from the Lehigh River area to Chester County and settled in what is now a village called Devon, very wealthy part of Chester County. And his farm was somewhere along the Lincoln Highway. Could have been either side of this. He moved from there to a farm west of Broadway, Virginia. I guess many of you have seen this picture. Some at least have. This is the farm when Daniel's, how many generations later, about 4 or so, descendant Moab, sold the farm in a hurry and went north to Washington County. Now maybe you know the rest of the story. And this is what that same farm looks like that I would call the Showalter homestead. It's not in Showalter ownership today. Daniel, again the immigrant who was born in Alsace, came as a 12-year-old on the ship, buried in the cemetery at Tristle's Mennonite Church at Broadway, Virginia. And this is his grave marker. And again, we'll let it go at that. But I promised in the letter, the invitation letter, that I would answer a bonus question. The bonus question is, are we related to Buck Showalter? Now, in case you don't pay any attention to professional sports, that's okay. Buck Showalter is the manager of the Baltimore Orioles, a Major League Baseball team. Previously to this assignment, Buck had managed for the New York Yankees and the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Texas Rangers. For each of these teams, Buck had taken a young or mediocre team and turned them into contenders within a few years. But he usually got in trouble with the owners of the teams because he's kind of a big personality with a little bit of an attitude perhaps at times, I don't know. By 2010, the Orioles were growing weary of their losing streaks, and they were desperately looking for a manager who could turn the team around. On August 2nd, the Orioles announced the hiring of Buck Showalter as their manager. And what followed was, again, a remarkable turnaround from last place teams to first place teams. One sports announcer even dubbed this team the Fighting Showalters. And as a committed non-resistant, I do get kind of a kick out of the irony in that term. In the baseball year just ended, Buck led the Orioles to just one level short of the World Series. For his leadership, Buck Showalter will probably be named as American League Manager of the Year, and watch for an announcement next week. Tell him you heard it here first. By the way, Buck Showalter was invited to this presentation. I'm not sure if he turned up or not. Is Buck here? I didn't think so. But the question still was, is he related to us? So the story keeps going. Growing up in Maryland in the 1960s and 70s, my favorite sports team was the Baltimore Orioles. They were the home state team, and besides, they were one of the best teams of that era. Anyone paying any attention to baseball during those times knows the names of Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, Boog Powell, and Jim Palmer. Many of my cousins also liked the Orioles. So following the managerial announcement, my cousins started asking me, are we related to him? Now, my workload at the office was a little bit light at the time, so I started an investigation on the internet. I got my first break when I discovered that Buck's given name was William Nathaniel Showalter. Okay, that's a clue. But then I found out it was not only that, but it is William Nathaniel Showalter III. Now, as a genealogist, I've got a few clues. I know his dad's name and I know his granddad's name. So I did some search on William Nathaniel, and I came to a genealogy site that the person claimed to be a granddaughter of William Nathaniel Showalter. Her name is Kathy Showalter Dalton. I wrote to her through email, and she wrote back and confirmed that she is a first cousin to Buck Showalter. Now, since she had her lineup from Jacob down through, and then she went a different direction, but I knew the rest of Buck's lineup, and we started Jacob, so I put my lineup along this side. I found that I am Buck's sixth cousin once removed. So if you know what you were to me, you can put your stuff in there and see how you're related to Buck Showalter. Again, we leave at Daniel. And if you have any more questions, or if you want to read the text of this presentation tonight, you can go to www.showalterhistory.com. This website has been in existence for about 10 hours. There's not much on it, but there is the entire text of the presentation tonight, and a little bit besides, and there will be more added to this over time. Now, I'm going to give the crowd, you've been really patient and long-suffering, I guess, and interested, I hope, but I'm going to give you a chance for maybe, say, 2 or 3 questions if something you wanted clarification, anything that you might want to know. I'll take a question from the group. Yes?
Is that name of the Bosslers, is that the Bosslers in Virginia? Bossler.
The question is the Bossler that we showed that we were related to came on the same ship? Are they the same as the Bosslers in Virginia? And unfortunately, I don't know. I've not done work on that family line, other than I know that at least the one branch connects into Franklin County through the Leschers groves and shanks. Any others? Okay?
If you're being charged for all this information, how much would it be?
If I would be charging for all this information, how much would it be? Well, I'm going to go back to when Daddy came home with nuggets. They were as valuable as gold to him, so I didn't think there would be a price tag that could go on that. Maybe one or two more.
How old is Otto that you met?
How old is Otto Showalter in Germany? He is in, I believe, maybe one of my brothers and sisters can help me if I'm wrong, but I would say he's in his early 70s. Does that sound right? They're consulting. They don't know either for sure, but I would say early 70s.
How did your dad meet up with Otto? How did they connect?
How did my dad connect to Otto? Of course, they never met in person.
Right.
They met through correspondence. Well, it started with Preston corresponding with Paul, and I don't know how that started between Preston and Paul. But then my dad got in on the communication with Paul up through about 1980. Then Paul developed an incapacitating mental illness. He was living, but he was hospitalized. He could not correspond any longer, and he died in 1984. Following that, my dad wrote to the Mennonite History Center in the Weierhof, Germany, and he said, is there anyone else I could correspond to who knows about Showalter history? And the director, I guess, there said, you need to talk to Otto Showalter. So Daddy started typing out letters. My brothers and sisters can probably picture this, typing out letters on his typewriter. He would mail them. They would go to Otto, who was a farmer, minister, but full-time farmer, who couldn't read English, and he would take them to get translated. And then when he would find time, he would write out by hand with pen and paper, and he would write a letter back in German. And Daddy would get the letter, and he would eventually get it to a translator. He would eventually find out what it read in English, and then he would, so they went back and forth. Very tedious process. But there were a number of letters between them, to the point that, yes, Otto just, you know, he knew of my father as if he was a friend. Okay, one more perhaps. Okay, if not, that's fine, and I'll be around if anybody wants to ask me any other questions later. Won't always have the answers, but I'll try. I'll do what I can. Just wanted to say, again, I kind of alluded to the fact that this might end up being part one of a part two series. I have papers on one of the tables back in the lobby. If you are interested in knowing if there's any more events that come around, such as a part two, such as possibly a tour of Showalter sites in Washington County, or Rockingham County, Virginia, or even if you're interested in a tour of Stringelbach, Zofingen, Schaffbusch, and Geisberg. Put your level of interest on that sheet, because we'll see where this leads to.
Well, would it be possible to have different families stand up? I don't even know where some of these fit in at, and I want to be sure they're all Showalter.
Maybe we should start by saying, if you're not a Showalter, let's do you first. Stand up if you're not or not married to one. If you're married, you're in. Marriage gets you in. But some are here just for the interest of it. So, yeah, you know, there's a number here. They wanted to come just for the history of it. Thank you. Now, I'm going to start, and I might need Ruthie's help for this. Ruthie, where are you? Okay. The oldest of Moab and Anna's children was Amanda, married to a bear. If you are from the Amanda branch, would you stand up? And again, if you're married, it counts. Marriage gets you in. Okay? Got a number?